In the absence of a bitter pill to swallow for COVID-19, should the world be looking to a bitter traditional remedy, umhlonyane or artemisia, as Madagascar is doing? I'm Aldrin Simpier, and this is African Perspective. Good evening. Tonight we speak to the South African Health Products Regulatory Body about non-pharmaceutical interventions to combat COVID-19, including Madagascar's artemisia herbal tea, and later on, is SADC ISIS combat ready following its insurgents in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province? But first, we start here. The World Health Organization is urging countries who are conducting vigorous COVID-19 testing, thus reporting high number of infections, not to take this as a failure to contain the spread of the virus. Dr. Maria van Kerkhoff says testing is part of the WHO's recommendations aimed at beating the disease. She was speaking during a media briefing a little earlier on.
Our recommendations include finding all cases, testing cases, caring for cases in the appropriate settings, depending on the severity of their symptoms. Finding all contacts, quarantining those contacts for the full 14 days, making sure that public is fully engaged so that they know what they can do. There is some question about the use of lockdowns or these public health measures. Many countries have had to put those in place because the transmission has increased so rapidly that they were forced to do that. What we have had to do is put guidance out to support countries in lifting those measures, which needs to be done in a controlled way, because this virus likes to find opportunities to spread, and if these lockdown measures are lifted too quickly, the virus can take off, and that's a worry that we have. But the question about countries finding cases should not be seen as a negative thing. It should be seen as a positive thing, and we need to support countries through these incredibly difficult times. And as you find cases, the only way to control and suppress this virus, this COVID-19, is to actually find them, quarantine those contacts, isolate the cases, and it will be brought under control.
Meanwhile, Madagascar has the world talking after announcing it has found a remedy for COVID-19. And as the debate over the country's tonic continues, South Africa's Ministerial Advisory Committee chairperson, Professor Abdul Karim, says more research is needed before determining its efficacy.
Some people have said to me, well, you know, there are people in Tanzania who've solved this problem with pawpaws. There are people in Madagascar who've solved this problem with artemisia. I say to them, it's a very simple way in which you determine that. Make the evidence available, provide it. The scientific community has a very open way in which we communicate our scientific information. Let us assess, is this true? Is the evidence available to show that this works? If it does, we'd all love to have it. If it doesn't, then we want to make sure that we're not promoting snake oils and charlatan treatments that are really not genuine, but just because somebody says so that we want to promote something. So I think that's the level of scientific evidence that we have to require as a society in order to ensure that we protect the health and well-being of our people.
So, Professor, obviously is going to come up, the issue of Madagascar. Obviously, the WHO itself saying that they support scientifically proven traditional medicines. I want you to answer that question. As I read this, it's from Siandamta along the same line, saying Madagascar has only 158 cases and have done only 3,907 tests, while recoveries may tempt us to believe that Madagascar is on the right track. Unfortunately, they have not tested enough. Do you share the sentiment? And I know Madagascar's president has said they're speaking to various African countries about using their organic COVID-19 antiviral, whatever they'd like to call it. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think if it's true that this product does work, I think it's very simple. Make the data available. Provide it to people, provide it to the World Health Organization, or if you would prefer, you know, have the African Academy of Sciences constitute a committee of eminent African scientists to look at the data, and then we can tell. We can't simply say this definitely works because the president says so. We can't say that this definitely works because this family says so or this person says so. We have to have the evidence. And I think what is important is to keep an open mind, because medications and treatments can often come from places that you would least expect. The drug that is claimed to be in this formula is artemisian. Artemisian was first shown by the Chinese as a traditional remedy to be effective against fever, and was eventually shown to be very effective against malaria. It's now one of the most commonly used treatments for malaria. So, in fact, it's a classic example of a traditional medicine that's now a mainstream, terrific drug used in malaria. So it could be used perhaps in this particular coronavirus epidemic, but we need the evidence first.
The African Union High Representative for Infrastructure, Raila Odinga, says East African regional leaders are reaching out to Tanzania's President, John Magufuli, to discuss his government's response to the COVID-19. Earlier this week, Magufuli suspended the head of the country's National Laboratory Services, Dr. Nyambura Moremi. Magufuli cast doubt over the country's COVID-19 tally. He blames the tally on what he says are faulty test kits. Odinga, however, says it is time for Magufuli to listen to the regional peers on a coordinated approach to contain the spread of the disease. He spoke exclusively to SABC News correspondent Sarah Kemani on this, as well as Africa's response to the virus that has killed over 3,000 people worldwide.
I've tried to reach him on phone, but I've not managed to, and I've left him a message on his SMS that I would like to discuss issues of national and regional and continental importance with him. I think that he, as a nationalist, need to get information from fellow leaders. And even our President Uhuru, I think, has tried to talk to him. Museveni, because we compare notes regularly with Museveni, with Kagame, and so on. Because this is, as you know, is a regional issue. If we don't control it in Kenya, it will affect Tanzania, it will affect Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Burundi. Because our destiny is tied together. We had a situation where any of these countries will have to close their borders against any of the other countries. We hope that will not have to come. That's why dialogue is the most important thing.
Are you concerned about his response so far?
Yeah, I think he is ill-advised, and he needs to have advice from other leaders. Because I've seen he's taken issue with the testing facilities in his country, that they're not giving the correct results. But I think they say that the taste in the pudding lies in the eating. And if people are dying, it means that there's something wrong with the food. So it is something that is of concern, that need to be discussed seriously among the leadership of the region, and I know that he listens, and he will listen to good advice.
And just a quick correction to that story earlier on. The numbers currently stand at 3.7 million people who have tested positively worldwide, while the number of deaths are at 260,000. Let's move over to this story, where the African Union is in talks with Madagascar in a bid to ascertain the safety and efficiency of this remedy. It's called COVID Organics. In a statement, the organization says the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will review the technical data The review will be based on global, technical and ethical norms to garner the necessary scientific evidence regarding the performance of the tonic. And the man hailed for discovering the tonic, Dr. Jerome Mangai, DRC native, who is working with the Madagascar Institute of Applied Research. In his personal blog, Mangai acknowledges that several countries have shown interest in the herbal tea, which is usually used in the fight against malaria. The scientist has also welcomed efforts by African governments to use research at their disposal as the race for a solution for COVID-19 continues. And at the same time, the country's traditional healers organization says currently working on finding a possible cure for the coronavirus with the help of several local universities. The organization is unhappy with the World Health Organization's position on traditional medicine, accusing it of sending out confusing messages. The WHO was warned against the use of Madagascar's untested medicine, which that country's president, Andry Rajoelina, has touted as a cure for the novel coronavirus. For more on this debate, we are now joined via Skype by the CEO of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, Dr. Boitumelo Simiti Mukokotela. Good evening, Dr. Boitumelo, and welcome to African Perspective. What do you make about this particular debate around non-pharmaceutical interventions versus scientific interventions?
Thank you. So for us in the area of regulations, it's important that when we look at such products and the claims that they make, that there is scientific evidence that corroborates these claims. So, as we speak now in South Africa, we don't have an application that has come through for this product to be considered by us as a regulator. And so until we see the scientific data, we do issue caution around the use of this product because as a regulator, we're concerned about three things, being safety, efficacy and quality of medicines. Mm-hmm. And if these medicines make very strong claims to be healing certain diseases, it's important that we've got the scientific data to confirm that.
Mm-hmm. And the argument from the government of Madagascar is that as it stands at the moment, all of the tests that they've done so far, their death toll currently stands at 0, and they contribute or attribute this to the use of this particular herbal tea, Artemisia. Hi, Dr. Boitumelo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sure. What do you make of that particular argument?
So, we note the low death rate in Madagascar. However, I must say that, to be able to make such a claim, one would need to do controlled studies where there's very clear scientific endpoints that would show that this product does work. And so I would again caution around mentioning this as the only mechanism that has been able to result in these low death rates. But again, it would be important that we engage on the scientific data. I am aware that the regulator in Madagascar is looking at this work. And so again, as a region, we will be reviewing any scientific data that comes through.
Have they been in touch with your institution, for instance, or any of the laboratories locally? Because the Minister of Health tweeted not so long ago that the government of Madagascar has been in touch and has asked South African institutions to help with the test on this particular remedy.
So for us as a regulator, no, we have not had a formal request or a formal engagement on this product. I do acknowledge that they may have reached out to the National Department of Health and many other stakeholders that are involved in this area of African traditional medicines, because we're not the only stakeholder involved. There's also the Department of Science and Innovation and many others.
And what would the normal steps be when it comes to testing a new remedy or a remedy that is claimed by a certain country to be effective in the fight of any disease or virus of this nature?
So the key thing is whenever there is a product that makes very strong health claims, there needs to be in place randomized clinical trials. There needs to be scientific data that corroborates those claims. And so this is the process that we apply for all drugs, whether it's even orthodox drugs as well as vaccines. When it comes to African traditional medicines, for us as SAPRA, we're working very closely with the Department of Science and Innovation and other stakeholders like universities to say, how do we set up a mechanism to be able to regulate these products? But again, I must say, it's important that we have scientific data that corroborates these claims.
And from the data that you currently have available, as we know that this has been a herbal product that has been used for years here in South Africa as well, and we call it umhlonyane. Do you have any data available to prove at least that this particular product can be used in the fight against coughs as well as fever?
So, I mean, as Prof. Slim Karim mentioned, this, the active in this plant, artemisinin, has been synthesized chemically and it's used for the treatment of malaria. But also there's a lot of anecdotal data around the use of this product. It's not sufficient at this point. I know there's been a lot of research on it, but for us as a regulator, we have not been submitted with any product that has the data where there's an intention for this product to be put in the market for the treatment of COVID. So we know that there's definitely no study at the moment that is looking at the claims of using this product for COVID.
And if we were to be running those trials in South Africa, for instance, how many people would we be using to run such a trial?
So typically with these trials, I mean, there's a guidance that we provide as a regulator in terms of the size of the trial, but also, there would be endpoints that would need to be designed. So depending on the endpoints, depending on the nature of the study, whether it's a randomized clinical trial, etc., there's a specific number, and there's very clear guidance on clinical trials for any product that makes any health claims.
Mm-hmm. And the duration of it?
Again, the duration is dependent on the product. It is dependent on the health claims that need to be made, because you need to test the product to a point that you can determine whether you're able to reach your endpoints or not. There's issues of looking at the side effects of this product, at the toxicity, at the safety. So this is quite an intricate process that needs to be put in place.
Okay, let's just quickly listen into what the Chinese director for the CDC there had to say about non-pharmaceutical interventions when he was in conversation with our foreign editor, Sophie Mukwena, about those interventions and how effective those interventions have been to try and combat COVID-19 in Wuhan quite specifically.
So this is something I'm calling. Looking back, what we have done in Wuhan, and from the very beginning, of course, because this virus, we have so many things hidden. It's a really, I call it covered virus. They have a lot of characteristics we don't know. But what we know, this is a very special unusual virus. And in Wuhan, of course, isolation, quarantine, and treatment, they are all important, for those strategies. Non-pharmaceutical intervention, NPI, is a major strategy, including if you are in China, the traditional Chinese herbs, Chinese medicine. It also, in some cases, it works. So this is the only thing you can do, because you don't, as you said, you don't have the vaccine, no special drugs. So the only thing you can do is the NPI.
Dr. Boitumelo, listening into what Dr. Goh had to say there, can we as South Africa say that we have looked into the Chinese response to COVID-19 and the use of non-pharmaceutical interventions?
I do apologize, I couldn't hear the clip, but what I would say is that as a country, there's a lot of research in the area of African traditional medicines, where we've got a number of universities like the University of the Free State, and we've got departments such as the Department of Science and Innovation that is supporting such research. So there is a lot happening in research of African traditional medicines. But any research that has looked into the impact of these products for COVID, I am not particularly aware of, and I could definitely stand to be corrected. Again, we must just remember that we've only recently been dealing with the COVID pandemic. And so it is, quite early on in the process that we would have a lot of research data on this. But again, I would say we need to engage with the relevant stakeholders around the amount of research that's been done in this space.
Would you be able to share with us what plants are being used or what traditional medicine is being looked into by these various institutions?
So, I mean, we know that South Africa has one of the largest diversity when it comes to indigenous plants. But however, as I say, as much as there's a lot of research in this area, I'm not aware of any research that is looking at the efficacy of these products against COVID-19. Certainly, as a regulator, we have not received a single application where there is an interest for the utilization of an indigenous plant for the treatment of COVID.
There's also this whole conversation and debate that's happening, and if you may have heard in our introduction as well, where the South African or African traditional leaders are saying that the WHO does not want to get them involved, and that similar argument has been made here in South Africa as well, where traditional leaders and healers are saying that involve us in the fight against COVID-19, and they feel that they are not being involved by the government. And this is also the issue around the stigma around traditional medicine. How do we address this particular issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important one. And I am going to go back to, you know, what I've been saying, and I heard Prof. Slim Karim also mention that, in that for us to ensure that we've got products that are safe, efficacious, and of quality, it is important that we have scientific data for those products. So I think what gives me comfort is that in South Africa, there's a lot of research that is taking place in this area with institutions that are playing a leading role. I think what I would encourage is that there must be an engagement and a partnership with various stakeholders to say what role should African traditional medicines play, and what data, scientific data, needs to be generated, and how do we go about generating that data?
Is this then the conversation that should be had on also a more general basis and around the barcoding and coding of indigenous medicine?
Yes, thank you. I mean, and this is a conversation that is indeed taking place. And, you know, I'll keep referring to the Department of Science and Innovation, because I know that they've played a leading role in this area to support, you know, African traditional medicines and to support the stakeholders in this area. It is quite an active discussion that's taking place.
What would your message be to South Africans currently at the moment and those who still believe in traditional medicine and want to use traditional medicine for the treatment of COVID-19?
I'd like to propose that we err on the side of caution. And this is purely on the basis that for us as a regulator, and our mandate is to ensure that we've got safe products that are efficacious on the market. We have not received an application for a single product with scientific data that shows that an African traditional medicine, a specific one, is active or has got substantiated claims against COVID-19. I think there are many, you know, complementary medicines that are indicating that they can boost the immune system, etc. But in terms of any product being efficacious against COVID-19, there are none at the moment that have come to us as a regulator.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Boitumelo Simite Mokokotlela, who is the CEO of the South African Health Products Regulatory Body. And on that note, the Health Minister, Zweli Mkhize, says his department will introduce systems to separate patients with respiratory symptoms from other patients. He was speaking during a media briefing at the Job Simankane Tabane Hospital in Rustenburg in the Northwest. Mkhize has also urged South Africans not to become complacent and to keep taking steps that will help flatten the curve.
When I said a few weeks back to my team, my colleagues, the MECs, that they must not look at the graph and start celebrating. They must know that we are actually seeing the calm before the storm, and a real devastating storm. I am very pleased to see that we have used the period to strengthen our infrastructure at the point of creating these field hospital beds. This contribution, therefore, from Sibanye-Stillwater comes in that vein to add in our facilities that we need to be able to admit more people, because there will be a need for more people to be admitted. We're seeing the numbers slowly increasing, and that increase indicates what we said at the beginning. At the beginning, we said every country will ultimately have COVID-19. We said that before we had our first patients, and we said there is no way that anybody can stop COVID-19 from getting into any country. And in this case, it has caught up with us. And secondly, we said many of us are going to get the infection. And that our role as the health services is not so much about trying to stop the infection from getting to each and every one of us, is slowing down the rate at which it gets to all of us.
Let's go to a quick ad break. When we come back, the discussion around the insurgence of ISIS in Mozambique. The big question is SADC ready to push back? Welcome back. Islamist militants are wreaking havoc in Mozambique's gas-rich northern province of Cabo Delgado. The government in Maputo admitted for the presence of the ISIL-affiliated fighters in the country for the first time last month amid escalating attacks. The fighters beheaded and murdered 52 villagers on April the 7th after they refused to be recruited. For more on this, we are now joined via Skype by the head of the Africa Institute for South Africa at the Human Science Research Council, Professor Cheryl Hendricks, as well as the Senior Training Coordinator, Transitional Crime Program Institute for Security Studies, Willem Els. Good evening and welcome to African Perspective. Professor Hendricks, let me start off with you. When did we become aware of the insurgence of ISIS in Mozambique?
The insurgency in Mozambique was taking place before the ISIS connection was revealed last year. So we saw already a spate of attacks from 2017. In 2017, we saw 6 attacks. In 2018, we saw 60. In 2019, we saw 163. And it was only in June last year that the Islamic State of the Central Africa province asserted that they were responsible for this. So the link was being made between the violent extremist organization called Ansar al-Sunnah and ISIS itself.
Mm-hmm. Would we then say that this was that they were co-opted, or that ISIS saw the opportune moment to actually move in and also supply arms?
Look, ISIS has been spreading throughout Africa since around 2014, 2015. This has been escalating since the defeat of the caliphate last year. And so we see ISIS factions in West Africa, in the Sahel region, for example, and now coming down to Central Africa and forming almost a triad, because we see it in DRC, we see it in Somalia, and we see it in northern Mozambique. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's an opportunity, what we're calling an opportunity structure that prevails in northern Mozambique for a group like this to take precedence. Mm-hmm. We're looking at the socioeconomic conditions in the northern province. We're looking at predominantly Muslim population. We're looking at feelings of deprivation, feelings of marginalization, and those all, give grievance and a chance for violent extremist groups then to come to the fore.
And Willem, from the evidence that's currently available, is it known how ISIS managed to infiltrate the country?
Good evening to you. First of all, I could not hear the beginning of your interview. I only started you a bit later. But good evening to you also, Professor Hendricks. I need to emphasize that the situation in Mozambique, in northern Mozambique, due to the blackout and due to the limited amount of information that is coming out of there, we can highly speculate and we can analyze some of the information that has been coming forth. So it is not known at this moment how they came. There's a lot of speculation that they moved down from DRC through Tanzania. And there's also, if you look at some of the other research that have been done, it has been established that even from Kenya, with the influence of some of the religious leaders from there, managed to radicalize the people in the area. But we must remember that it's a very porous area. The borders are porous, and there's a lot of movement between the different countries there.
What then does that tell us about the various states? If, for instance, we do say that they may have used the route that you just spoke of, what does this then tell us about the borders themselves, as well as the ability of these countries to pick up stress signals that there is a problem here and we need to act?
Okay, in the first place, the borders are extremely porous. Most of your borders in Africa are porous, for that matter. And remember, they don't only have the border with the Rovuma River, they also have the border with that border Zambia and Tanzania and Zimbabwe. So there's a lot of options that they can take, but they also have the option of coming by sea. We know that there's a lot of traffic by sea with your dhows and your vehicles, your informal movement of your vessels there. So it is really it's a vibrant area for commerce across borders there. Informal commerce and trade is taking place. So these people are opportunists and they will make use of that.
Yeah. Professor Hendricks, can you just quickly touch on that, and just including what's currently happening in Tanzania? Do you think that that is the biggest issue, that the country itself, as a neighboring country, is also failing to pick up these stress signals?
Look, the porous borders have been mentioned. If you're trying to establish a caliphate, this is going against the whole idea of nation states to begin with. It's an alternative statehood. And so they will look for those kinds of opportunities. It's always, when we look at where they base themselves, it's always in the hinterland of particular countries. And it's always in areas where you're going to get ethnic groups straddling boundaries, where you're going to have weak security and then the local socioeconomic grievances. So we're talking here about weak governance to begin with, and we're talking about human security issues, and those are the ones that need to be dealt with. So most of the responses against violent extremism across Africa have been militarized responses. And we see an escalation in violent extremism across the continent, especially now in the Sahel region. So Burkina Faso comes up quite readily, Mali, etc. Because the responses have to be two-pronged. You have to deal with the root causes. You have to deal with the governance issues. You have to deal with the socioeconomic issues. And these are not, we can't just depict them as foreigners coming in. These are actually local people who are then imbibing this ideology, because it's offering them some alternative here. It's access to resources, it's access to an ideology with a different vision for how you run your society, etc. So we need to deal with what is driving our youth into these particular organizations.
Yeah, and just quickly then, let's touch on President Nyusi's government and how they responded to this issue. Earlier on, you said that as early as June last year, there were signs as well as some evidence that there is insurgency of ISIS in the area. Why then was it that the government kept quiet and only admitting now in 2020 of April that indeed there is ISIS in that area?
And I can't speak for the government itself and why they have particular actions, but I mean, any government would want to play down this particular threat in their country. And last year was an election year for Mozambique as well in October. So for a long time, they have been playing down the threat. I think now that the links are becoming very clear with ISIS and the escalation in attacks, not only will Mozambique have to respond more effectively, and we then see them bringing in mercenaries, Russian mercenaries, and then South African mercenaries, etc. But as you pointing out, SADC has to be more proactive in dealing with the situation as well.
Willem, let's quickly then touch on the agenda of this insurgency that is currently underway in the northern parts of Mozambique.
Okay. First of all, we have to rely on the information that came forth from the insurgents themselves. They were very clear that they wanted to establish a Muslim governance. They wanted to replace the existing laws with the Sharia law, and they wanted good governance. They're against corruption. And they wanted to give to establish something better than that is in place. You see, if you look back at over the past 3 years, in the beginning, the attacks and how they changed their strategy from the beginning when they were burning down and they were killing the people and manning the people, etc., etc. When they attacked Mozambique, the last time in March, on 23rd of March, they actually did not kill the local people. They handed food to them, and they started to bring them, try to win their hearts and their minds, and only attack the government institutions. So their agenda clearly is that they want to fill the gap because, like the professor said, you have to look at the root causes and the void that has been established and has been left by the poor governance that is taking place in the region. If you look at Pemba, that's the capital city of the province there, is as far from Maputo than Windhoek is from Maputo. It's 2,500 kilometers from there. So it's a long distance from there, and these people feel marginalized. They feel neglected. There's not a lot of development going on their way. There's a lot of development in terms of the exploration of the resources, but very little is coming their way. And because of that, these people moved in and said, well, we can make it different. We can make it better for you. And by that, they are winning the hearts of the people and the minds of the people. Remember, if somebody has nothing, a little bit of good will win their heart.
Professor Hendricks just touched on the role of SADC. And Willem, what would you say the role of SADC should be? And the other question for me is that do we even believe that SADC Security Council is ready to combat ISIL?
Yeah, first of all, you have to look at what the mandate of SADC is and what they do. The African Union has already taken notice of the situation there, and they mentioned their concern. SADC up to this stage, unfortunately, has been very quiet. We do not know what is going on behind the scenes, but publicly, not a lot has been coming forth on what their intentions are and how they want to, or they see that they want to deal with the situation. SADC, as the regional body, has got a mandate, and they've got also the responsibility to intervene and to help when there's a problem in some of these countries. But also, on the other hand, we must remember that SADC will not just move in if there's not a request from the host country or from the home country that say, okay, listen, we need your assistance. We do not know if President Nyusi has actually approached SADC and asked him for assistance.
And Professor Hendricks, how important then is the sharing of intelligence around the work of ISIS and the network of ISIS, particularly in the SADC region?
I think that is absolutely key. You have to share information, intelligence, etc. I think part of the challenge in Southern Africa is that we are not as up to speed on countering violent extremism as West Africa and North Africa and the Sahel region is. So we're going to have to bring ourselves up to speed in this regard.
Are the neighboring countries in danger at all, Professor Hendricks, before I go to Willem?
Look, all countries are in danger of violent extremism. It's the level of the threat.
Yeah.
So South Africa, for example, is not listed as a high-level threat, but there is a threat to neighboring countries. There has to be.
And I asked this on the basis of, you spoke earlier on about this, and Willem also touched on it, that what these people are doing is that they're speaking to the hearts and the minds of people who are quite disgruntled in the governance systems of the countries as well as their failure. And if you look at what's currently happening on the SADC region, if you look at Zimbabwe, for instance, there have been major issues there around the governance. Here in South Africa as well, major qualms as well around governance in the country. And one then wonders whether countries like Zimbabwe would be prone and seen as fertile ground for ISIS.
If it's addressed to me, I think ISIS needs different kinds of opportunities. So it needs to establish bases. It's has attacks on other countries, so attacks in Europe, attacks in the United States, and it has spaces where it will need to organize itself from. So countries like South Africa, I think, offer an opportunity for that, because for that you need infrastructure, you need good communications, etc. So we have to look more holistically at the needs of a particular organization, how they structure themselves, and where they then will place themselves. Certainly all the countries neighboring northern Mozambique are at risk, and they all have governance challenges. It's the idea of the caliphate, that the ideology that goes with it, that might be a bit challenged when you move out of Muslim-dominated territories, though.
Yeah. Willem, can you just quickly touch on that as well? And looking specifically in South Africa, we remember that there were two twins, I think, was it siblings, who were arrested a couple of years ago, and we were told that they were being recruited by ISIS.
Yeah, just to come in on that, I agree with the professor, and we just need to understand that the conditions must be conducive. These people will moved in where you have a failed state sort of situation, where it will be easier for them to move in and try to dominate and to prey on the grievances of the people. So we have to look at the state of the nation, what is going on there, and are the conditions there for them to thrive. But also we must remember that ISIS doesn't necessarily go into a country and then they want to attack in that country. They can use a country for a base. They can use that country to train. They can use that country to gather funds for and to generate funds for them. So that is why it is difficult to say that are they operational in South Africa? We don't really know, because there's a lot of intelligence or a lot of information about that. But we, as you rightly said, that we've got the Tulsi twins that are currently on trial. The trial is ongoing, and there's not a lot of information about that, but we know that what has been in the press, that they wanted to go and join ISIS. They have been prohibited to do so, and then they wanted to perpetrate some acts here, and they've been arrested before they could do so. So you must just understand that, especially because of the dynamics of your recruitment and your online and your social media, the world became a village.
Okay.
And these people can really recruit anywhere. So everywhere where you have people that are being marginalized, that are being disgruntled, they are being preyed on.
Okay. Just in closing then, Willem, before I go to Professor Hendricks, your take on the combat against, or the fight against ISIS at an international level, and as well as what's being done from the United Nations Security Council side.
Okay. Just, I have to agree with what the professor said. You can't just go in with a one-dimensional approach or strategy against them. It must be holistic, and also it must be multidimensional. There is a place for force. There is a place for negotiations. There's a place for peace. There's a place also to start to take away the grievances. Implement good governance and take away the anger of the people, and then that will go away. We must also remember, a lot of it's about perceptions. If we can change the perception of the people away from the negative towards the positive, then you can win them over, and that is what needs to be done. If you look at in the world, we make some mistakes. We do a lot of good things, but I think the United Nations has got a very good strategies in place. African Union has got some strategies. SABC has got some strategies in place. We just need to implement and follow them.
Okay. Professor Hendricks, your take on the international strategy around fighting ISIS?
I think I agree with Alan. The counter-violent extremist strategies are there. They need to be balanced. They need to be implemented. But I think more than ever, we need to be thinking of what gives people a sense of belonging, what gives them a sense of identity, of dignity, and how do we deal with the issues of sustainable livelihoods. Because those are the factors that are generating this idea of alternative nations and states.
Is that then about national pride?
It is. It's about pride in Islam itself also. It's about reconstituting that state.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Cheryl Hendricks, who is the head of the Africa Institute for South Africa at the Human Sciences Research Council, as well as Senior Training and Coordinated Transitional Crime Program at the Institute for Security Studies' Willem Els. Let's move over to this story. Back on this news relating to coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic has reignited acts of kindness and compassion to Basotho. This week, a group of young Basotho from Roma vicinity were forced to defy the lockdown regulations in an effort to save lives. A mud house caved in, threatening the 13 family members living in the single room. A group of young men and women in solidarity sounded the alarm using social media, and help came from all corners.
A dream come true. These are small steps to decency, erupting into song and dance. A moment to cherish. This house collapsed following heavy downpours a week ago. This lady was the first on the scene.
There was no pad at the back. They were having the metal sheet behind, and they were having some concrete blocks. It was mixed up. It was not the house to live in. That's why we said we have to sacrifice and do something.
Armed with shovels and wheelbarrows, they hit the ground running. The clock was ticking. They needed every kind of help they could get, from those who prepared meals for the crew to those preparing winter crops.
We realize that if we don't take action now, it will be a hard time of their life when winter comes.
With everyone observing strict sanitization protocol, much progress has been achieved. In less than a week, things were looking real good. Now on to some last-minute touch-ups. This dream was now becoming a reality. And it's hard not to get emotional. Thirteen members of this family lived in this house, while parents live in another small hut adjacent. This house will bring back some modicum of dignity to this family. 25,000 raised, some offering bricks and cement, while others brought their skills and knowledge, an act of kindness, solidarity, and the spirit of Botho, all in time of the pandemic. Rapelang Khatebe, SABC News, Roma, Lesotho.
Well, act of kindness also meaning that you also take a risk. And this evening's big story was around Umhlonyana. And unfortunately, The authorities from Madagascar were not available to be part of this evening's conversation, but we will continue to try and get them on the show. That's it for this evening. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye, and remember to take care of each other.